Greetings, dear seekers of truth and sacred knowledge. It is with great joy that I find myself here once again in this space, dedicated to exploring the eternal mysteries that permeate our existence. Today, we will enter a theme that has been the object of great misunderstandings throughout the ages, a knowledge that was deliberately hidden from the masses by those who understand its true transformative power. We will address how the condition of being alone, of remaining single in a world that constantly pushes toward external union, can be not only a circumstantial state, but a profound indicator of spiritual evolution, a sign that the soul walks toward its true cosmic nature. Have you ever wondered why you feel that inner restlessness when society insists that you should be in a relationship? Why that silent voice within you seems to whisper that there is something more, something beyond the social conventions imposed upon us since birth? This intuition is not a mere whim or resistance to the established order, but the calling of the soul that recognizes its unique journey. In the ancient Gnostic traditions, the solitary ones were called monacos, those who returned to primordial unity, who understood that before duality, there is the One, and that the path back to the source necessarily passes through the recognition of the inherent completeness of being. The ancient Egyptians, in their mystery temples, established isolation rituals for the neophytes who sought initiation into the sacred. Secrets. In these periods of solitude, often extending for years, the initiate was confronted with his own nature, with the ghosts of his ego, with the illusions of separation that form the veil of Maya, as the sages of India would later call it. The Hierophants knew that only in the stillness of solitude could the spirit finally hear the silent voice of divine wisdom, the one that always speaks, but is rarely heard amid the bustle of mundane existence and superficial relationships. In medieval alchemy, a process so misunderstood by contemporary materialist science, the true laboratory was never external, but resided in the alchemist's own consciousness. The athanor, the furnace in which transmutations took place, was the practitioner's own body, and the isolation of the operator was a fundamental condition for the great work to be accomplished. Solitude represented the hermetic vessel, sealed against external influences that could contaminate the process of purification and sublimation of the spiritual. Prima materia. This is why so many great alchemists lived as hermits, far from the distractions and energetic dissipations that human relationships often provoke. We must understand that the state of being single, when consciously embraced and not merely endured as an undesirable condition, places the human being in a particular vibrational frequency that facilitates certain types of spiritual development. In the Pythagorean schools of ancient Greece, students were divided into categories, and there were those called akousmatikoi, the listeners who were required to remain in silence and solitude for periods of up to 5 years before being admitted to the higher teachings. Pythagoras understood that a mind scattered in multiple directions, especially in the emotional complexities of intimate relationships, could hardly grasp the mathematical and musical truths that govern the cosmos. In this moment, allow me to pause our exploration of spiritual mysteries to ask something that perhaps no one has ever truly asked you before. When you look within, in the hours of silence when no one else is watching, what is the spiritual emptiness that echoes most deeply in your being? That search you may have never shared aloud. Many souls walk for decades, carrying unanswered questions, seeking deeper connections in silence, believing they are alone on their journey. But you are not alone. There are countless others listening now who feel exactly the same inner calling. If you feel comfortable, share in the comments. I seek to understand the purpose of my existence beyond the material veil, or simply tell your own spiritual journey. Your comment may be exactly the light that someone else needs to take the next step on their path of self-discovery. The great mystical traditions of the East also recognize the transformative power of solitude. In Tibetan Buddhism, the most dedicated practitioners withdraw into long retreats in isolated mountain caves, where they remain for years or even decades in solitary contemplation. Not out of rejection of the world or misanthropy, as modern psychologists might mistakenly interpret, but because they understand that certain spiritual realizations can only blossom in the garden of solitude. In Chinese Taoism, the concept of wu-wei, often translated as non-action, is closely tied to the ability to be alone, to find completeness in emptiness, to realize union with the Tao. Precisely when one abandons the external search for completeness through another, It is essential that we understand that when we speak of solitude as a spiritual path, we are not advocating for neurotic isolation or social escapism. True spiritual solitude is an inner state of self-sufficiency and integration that can paradoxically lead to more authentic and profound relationships with all beings. As the German mystic Meister Eckhart taught, it is necessary first to empty oneself completely, to become like an inner desert, so that the divine may finally manifest in fullness. In his sermons, often misunderstood by the orthodoxy of his time, Eckhart emphasized that detachment, including detachment from the need for completeness through another human being, was the most direct path to union with the divine. In the Hermetic tradition, the principle of polarity teaches that everything has two poles, that opposites are identical in nature, differing only in degree. Applied to the question of relationships, we understand that solitude and union are only different gradations of the same principle, and that true union can only occur between beings who have first discovered union with themselves. The Kybalion, a fundamental text of Hermeticism, states that the all is in the mind of the all. This profound maxim reveals that completeness already exists within each of us, since we are individualized manifestations of universal consciousness. Contemporary societies, with their excessive focus on materialism and immediate gratification, have created a culture of emotional dependence and fear of solitude. The entertainment industry, the media, and even certain branches of modern psychology promote the idea that being alone is equivalent to being unhappy or incomplete. This is one of the great lies of our time, perpetuated by those who benefit from insecurity and the search. In the Hermetic tradition, the principle of polarity teaches that everything has two poles, that opposites are the same in nature, differing only in degree. Applied to the matter of relationships, we understand that loneliness and union are merely different gradations of the same principle, and that true union can only occur between beings who have first discovered union within themselves. The Kybalion, a foundational text of Hermeticism, states that the all is in the mind of the all. This profound axiom reveals that completeness already exists within each of us, since we are individualized manifestations of universal consciousness. Modern societies, with their excessive focus on materialism and immediate gratification, have created a culture of emotional dependence and fear of solitude. The entertainment industry, the media, and even certain currents of modern psychology promote the idea that being alone is equivalent to being unhappy or incomplete. This is one of the great lies of our time, perpetuated by those who benefit from constant external validation. The powers that control social structures understand that a human being who has found completeness within themselves is virtually impossible to manipulate through fear and insecurity, the primary tools of social control. In the esoteric Rosicrucian traditions, the concept of the alchemical marriage refers primarily to the union of polarities within the self, the integration of the inner sun and moon before any external union. The true Rosicrucian understands that the most fundamental relationship is the one we establish with our own divine nature, and that all other relationships are reflections and extensions of this primordial union. The rose that blooms on the cross symbolizes precisely this realization, the beauty of spiritual consciousness blossoming from the experience of earthly limitation and suffering, including the apparent limitation of solitude. The Jewish Kabbalistic tradition offers profound insights on the subject through the concept of yeshud, or unification. In the Kabbalistic texts, particularly the Zohar, we find the idea that before the creation of the material universe, God existed in a state of perfect and indivisible unity. Creation, seen as an act of divine self-limitation, introduced the apparent separation and multiplicity. The spiritual work of the Kabbalist consists in reversing this process, reunifying the dispersed divine sparks. Interestingly, many of the great historical Kabbalists chose lives of relative isolation, wholly dedicated to contemplation and study, understanding that the path of return to divine unity required a degree of detachment from worldly identifications, including romantic and familial ties. When we examine the biographies of the great mystics and initiates from all traditions, we find a recurring pattern of significant periods of solitude. Jesus withdrew into the desert for 40 days before beginning his public ministry. Buddha left behind family and social position to seek enlightenment in isolation. Muhammad received his revelations in a secluded cave on Mount Hira. Krishna often instructed Arjuna in places far from the crowds. This pattern is not accidental, but reflects a universal understanding that certain spiritual realizations can only occur when the noise of the external world is temporarily silenced. In esoteric astrology, a discipline that goes far beyond the simplifications of popular horoscopes, there are specific planetary configurations that indicate souls incarnated with the mission to develop through the experience of solitude. Individuals with a prominent Saturn in their natal charts, especially when this planet forms significant aspects with the Sun, the Moon, or the luminaries of the seventh house, often experience relationships as sources of limitation and karmic learning, being naturally led to periods of isolation that, if correctly understood, can lead to profound spiritual realizations. Saturn, so misunderstood by popular astrology as a mere bringer of hardship, is in truth the great initiator, the guardian of the threshold, who tests our spiritual maturity through solitude and apparent limitations. In spiritual alchemy, the process known as nigredo, the darkness or black work, corresponds to an initial stage of dissolution and putrefaction of the raw material of the personality. This stage often manifests in the aspirant's life as periods of depression, isolation, and deep questioning of all previous values and relationships. The alchemists understood that without this phase of dissolution, no true transmutation would be possible. Solitude, often imposed by life circumstances, can be understood as the alchemical crucible in which the egoic personality is gradually dissolved, allowing the emergence of the spiritual gold of higher consciousness. It is important to note that in virtually all authentic initiatic traditions, from esoteric Freemasonry to the Eleusinian mystery schools, the neophyte is symbolically represented as the solitary one, the one who has left the profane world in search of light. This solitude is not merely ritualistic or symbolic, but represents a psychological and spiritual reality. The initiatic path is in its essence a solitary journey for each. Consciousness must awaken by itself even when guided by masters and supported by a community of seekers. When we apply these ancestral understandings to modern life, we discover that being single can be an extraordinary opportunity for spiritual development, particularly in an era characterized by superficiality and immediacy in human relationships. Contemporary relationships often based more on convenience, mutual gratification, and fear of loneliness than on a true recognition of the others. Spiritual nature can become subtle obstacles to the awakening of higher consciousness. Of course, there are unions that serve as catalysts for the spiritual growth of both partners, but these are relatively rare and generally occur between individuals who have already established a healthy relationship with themselves. The point is not to categorically reject relationships, but to understand that the state of being single, when accepted with gratitude and awareness, offers unique opportunities that would rarely present themselves otherwise. The time and energy that would be directed toward the complex dynamics of a relationship can be channeled into spiritual practices, the study of sacred texts, selfless service to humanity, and deep contemplation. The absence of the psychological projections that inevitably occur in intimate relationships allows for a clearer inward gaze, facilitating the recognition and integration of one's own shadows, a process essential for any genuine spiritual advancement. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychologist and mystic whose contributions transcend the boundaries of academic psychology, observed that many modern neuroses do not stem from the repression of instincts as Freud supposed, but from the lack of meaning and spiritual purpose in life. Jung understood that the process of individuation, the path toward psychic wholeness, often requires periods of introversion and withdrawal from collective expectations, including the expectation that everyone must seek fulfillment through romantic relationships. In his own life, despite being married, Jung deeply valued his periods of solitude at his tower in Bollingen, where he could dedicate himself fully to the dialogue with the depths of his psyche. Eastern meditation schools, particularly the Zen and Vipassana traditions, emphasize the importance of solitary practice, even when undertaken in a communal setting. The meditator learns that in silence and stillness, when all external supports are removed, a dimension of peace and fullness is revealed that was always present, but had remained obscured by the constant search for gratification and external validation. It is no coincidence that many advanced practitioners of these traditions choose lives of relative simplicity and detachment, often remaining single, in order to dedicate themselves more fully to spiritual practice. In the Christian monastic tradition, especially in its deepest contemplative expressions, as found in the writings of St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and Thomas Merton, celibacy is valued not as a rejection of the body or sexuality, as it is often misunderstood, but as a conscious redirection of vital energy toward mystical union with the divine. The spiritual marriage described by these mystics refers to a state of union with God so intimate and absorbing that human unions, no matter how beautiful or meaningful, appear as pale reflections of this supreme realization. In Advaita Vedanta, one of the most profound expressions of Hindu spirituality, we find the concept of non-duality, the understanding that the apparent separation between beings is an illusion, and that in ultimate reality there exists only Brahman, the absolute consciousness. The great sage Ramana Maharshi, a modern exponent of this tradition, lived as a solitary renunciant and taught that true liberation comes from the persistent inquiry into the nature of the self. For Ramana, the fundamental question, "Who am I?" gradually dissolves all limiting identifications, including the identification of oneself as someone incomplete who needs a relationship in order to be whole. It is also necessary to understand that spiritual solitude is not the same as emotional loneliness. The former is a state of fullness and self-sufficiency, while the latter is a condition of lack and alienation. Many people seek relationships precisely to escape emotional loneliness, only to discover that this sense of separation and disconnection can persist even in the company of a loving partner. The true healing for emotional loneliness does not come from the outside, but from the recognition of our intrinsic connection with all of life, a realization that paradoxically tends to blossom more easily during periods of physical solitude. Tantric teachings, so often misunderstood and reduced to their sexual dimension in the West, offer a particularly interesting perspective on our theme. In authentic Tantra, especially in the non-dual schools of Kashmir Shaivism, the practitioner learns to recognize that all manifested reality is an expression of the cosmic dance between Shiva consciousness and Shakti energy. The goal is not to deny any aspect of human experience, including sexuality and relationships, but to transcend identification with the limited forms of these expressions. Thus, both conscious sexual union and conscious abstinence can serve as paths to spiritual realization, depending on the individual dharma of each practitioner. In the Sufi tradition, the mystical poet Rumi wrote extensively about divine love, often using the language of romantic human love as a metaphor. However, a deeper reading of his poems reveals that the true beloved is always God, the ultimate reality beyond all forms and names. Rumi, like many Sufis, understood that the longing for union with another human being is at its deepest root, a displaced expression of the longing for union with the divine. Those who recognize the true nature of this longing can consciously redirect it to its original source, transforming the state of being single into a mystical marriage with the divine. At this point in our exploration, you who have accompanied us on this journey through esoteric knowledge might be wondering whether we are advocating for a complete withdrawal from meaningful human relationships. Not at all. The message of the ancient teachings is far more subtle and profound. What the mystical traditions teach us is that true intimacy, whether with ourselves, with other human beings, or with the divine, can only blossom from a state of inner wholeness and self-acceptance. Relationships based on lack, on the attempt to fill emotional voids, or on the escape from solitude inevitably reproduce patterns of dependency and suffering. The condition of being single offers a unique opportunity to cultivate this inner completeness, to discover that the source of love, joy, and fulfillment we so eagerly seek outside already exists within us, simply waiting to be recognized. When this discovery occurs, a profound transformation takes place. Relationships are no longer sought from a place of need, but are chosen from a place of abundance. The individual who has realized their essential wholeness can then enter into genuinely free and nourishing relationships, or may choose to remain alone, knowing that in either case their fundamental fulfillment does not depend on external circumstances. From a broader perspective, we can say that civil status is less important than the state of consciousness. There are single individuals completely identified with the ego, and its constant pursuit of gratification, just as there are people in relationships who have reached elevated levels of spiritual realization. What determines the transformative potential of any life condition is not the condition itself, but the awareness we bring to it. Nevertheless, it is undeniable that certain conditions tend to facilitate specific kinds of development, and consciously embraced solitude has been recognized throughout the ages as a powerful catalyst for spiritual awakening. If you are currently single and have been struggling with feelings of inadequacy or incompleteness due to this condition, the invitation of the ancestral teachings is for you to completely reevaluate your perspective. Instead of seeing your state as a deprivation or a waiting period until the real life begins with the arrival of a relationship, recognize the extraordinary gift that has been given to you, the space, the time, and the freedom to explore the deepest dimensions of your being, to establish an intimate and nourishing relationship with yourself, and to discover that dimension of your being which transcends all transient relationships. The mystery schools have always taught that the authentic spiritual path does not add anything to the seeker, but removes the veils and obstacles that obscure their true nature. Likewise, the realization that comes through conscious solitude is not the acquisition of some special quality or state, but the recognition of what has always been present, your essential nature of wholeness, peace, and unconditional love. This nature does not need to be sought, developed, or obtained from outside, but merely rediscovered through the stilling of the mind and the heart, constantly scattered in worldly concerns. Before we conclude our exploration of this profound theme, I would like to offer some practical considerations for those who wish to transform their state of being single into a conscious path of spiritual evolution. 1. Cultivate friendship with your own solitude. Begin by developing a relationship of friendship and acceptance with your solitude. See it not as a void to be filled, but as a sacred space for discovery. Set aside regular periods of complete silence and isolation, free from technological distractions and passive entertainment. During these moments, simply practice being present with yourself. Observe your thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations without judgment. Allow what arises to surface without needing to analyze, fix, or escape it. This practice of mindful presence becomes the fertile ground for deep inner transformation. 2. Engage in sacred study and contemplation. Dedicate time to studying the sacred and philosophical texts of the great spiritual traditions, especially those that explore themes such as non-duality, self-knowledge, and inner realization. Texts from Advaita Vedanta, the Tao Te Ching, the Gospel of Thomas, the works of Meister Eckhart, or the Zohar, can serve as powerful companions on the path. Approach these writings with a contemplative heart, not merely for information, but for insight and transformation. Read, slowly reflect deeply, and allow the teachings to resonate within you. Remember that true spiritual knowledge is not merely intellectual. It must be assimilated and verified through your own direct experience. Let the teachings be a mirror and a guide, but never a substitute for the wisdom that emerges from the silence within. Through this integration, solitude becomes not a lack, but a luminous fullness, a sacred container in which the divine self is revealed. 3. Establish a regular practice of meditation, contemplation, or prayer. Develop consistent practices that align with your own spiritual inclination, whether it be meditation, contemplative reflection, or devotional prayer. These practices act as anchors that gradually stabilize your awareness in the deeper dimensions of your being, beyond the fluctuations of the conditioned mind and its relentless external pursuits for fulfillment. With time and dedication, you may come to realize that the inner space of silence and stillness revealed by these practices becomes more real and substantial than the distractions and concerns of the outer world. This inner sanctuary, once discovered, becomes your most intimate source of guidance, peace, and clarity. 4. Engage in selfless service from a place of wholeness. Seek opportunities to serve others not from a place of lack or emotional need, but from your inner fullness. True selfless service, seva in Sanskrit, has long been recognized across all spiritual traditions as a powerful remedy for self-absorption and neurotic isolation, which can sometimes arise when solitude is misunderstood or misused. When you redirect your attention and energy toward the well-being of others, without seeking recognition, validation, or reward, you tap into a transcendent dimension of connection and purpose. This outward flow of compassionate action nourishes not only those you help, but also dissolves the illusion of separation, reminding you that the path of solitude is not one of disconnection, but of deeper unity with all of life. 5. Cultivate an attitude of gratitude. Finally, embrace a mindset of gratitude for the unique opportunity that the state of being single represents on your spiritual path. Gratitude is one of the most powerful transformative practices capable of turning any circumstance into a springboard for growth and realization. By recognizing and giving thanks for the hidden gifts embedded in your current life condition, you align your consciousness with the currents of abundance and wholeness, which are the very essence of reality. A closing invitation. And now, before we part ways, I would like to humbly ask for your support so that we may continue to share these ancestral teachings with a growing number of fellow seekers. If this content has brought you new insights or touched something deep within your being, please consider showing your support by leaving a like, subscribing to our channel, sharing this message with those you feel could benefit from these reflections. Your comments are also deeply valued as they help us understand how these teachings are being received and how we can better serve in our future explorations. May your journey in solitude be one of illumination and inner fulfillment, and may you remember always that the light you seek has been within you all along. Always remember that true spiritual evolution does not depend on external circumstances, but on the awareness we bring to each moment of our existence. Whatever your current relationship status may be, the invitation is to awaken to the wholeness that already exists within you, that dimension of being which transcends all divisions, separations, and longings. As the great master Nisargadatta Maharaj taught, the world is full of beauty. You only need to be available to it. In the same way, your own essential nature is full of love, peace, and fulfillment. You only need to be available to this recognition. May wisdom guide your path. May the light of wisdom always illuminate your path, and may each step of your journey lead you more deeply into the home you never truly left, the wholeness that is your true nature. Until our next meeting, remain in the peace of eternal knowledge.